Well, welcome back to another Change Agent Leadership podcast. Whether you're leading or growing a team or guiding them through the challenges of HR can make or break your leadership many times. Leaders often underutilize HR or misunderstand its role, sometimes until it's too late, and then it's kind of an emergency situation. Today, we're going to uncover some of the top mistakes leaders make with HR and how to better lead with HR with clarity, trust, and confidence. So I'm not an expert on HR, but my guest is today. My guest is Kevin Norton. He's an experienced insurance and risk advisor who spent years working alongside HR professionals and organizations, especially in the nonprofit faith-based sectors. He's currently a managing partner at Lightwell Insurance Advisors of Arizona and Utah. Lightwell is the largest ministry insurance agency in Arizona. So, Kevin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jonathan. Glad to be here.
So, as I mentioned for the introduction, I'm not an HR expert. So, one thing I appreciate about you is that you approach HR not just as a compliance function, which many times it is, but as a strategic partner in risk management, conflict resolution, culture building, etc. So I'm going to jump into and just ask you some questions and get your thoughts on these things. What would you say is what's leaders often is misunderstanding about HR's role? All leaders just kind of, how do they approach you as what's a misunderstanding leaders have about HR and the role of HR in leadership?
And you're right. I deal with a lot of nonprofit organizations, and a lot of times HR is emerging because they've
Mm,
started out small and then they've grown, and have had the need to add a number of employees. But the mistakes I see with leaders sometimes regarding HR is they don't see it as a vital spoke of a
mm,
well-run organization. Uh, a lot of them will view HR as an administrative position as opposed to a leadership or even an executive position. They see them as paper shufflers. And when in fact, there's so much more to an HR department, an HR
mm.
professional, an HR director than just shuffling papers. Um, I would say HR professionals should be a vital part of the executive team of a organization and be able to speak into important decisions regarding HR.
No, that makes sense. You touched on it at the beginning there. That's a good point. A lot of times HR is added on. People start small. It's a small business. It's a small nonprofit. It's maybe a small church, and HR is handled. It's a side thing. It's like you have a couple employees, but as it grows, it kind of can grow into its own thing. And so a lot of times, a misunderstanding there is, yeah, it can just take care of itself, is what I'm hearing. That's not a good thing. Another thing I've heard is HR is just compliance. All they do is check boxes for us and keep us out of jail, which kind of like
Sure.
legal as well. I've had this conversation with lawyers as well, right? The lawyers just keep us out of jail, which is not true. I mean, that hopefully is you don't get to that point, but that is dangerous. I mean, how have you experienced that myth, so to speak, of, well, they're just here to help? I mean, have you seen that get people in trouble?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. HR, a lot of what an HR executive does, HR director does, is legal and compliance. I
Mm,
would say, maybe 50% of their job has to do with legal and compliance, but it's much more than just legal and compliance. Um, HR directors, HR professionals are always communicating with their leaders and managers within an organization. They're teaching them, they're coaching them on how to deal with employees, how to address issues that come up with employees. They offer great wisdom and guidance, and they can walk with the leaders and managers through these issues.
yeah.
Leaders should come to HR before, they start working on an issue, before they want to terminate somebody. They should always get HR involved. So there's a lot that HR can offer to the leaders and managers as they, work with their employees.
Yeah. No, thanks. Sorry, my brain is just thinking. I'm like, I know we were going to cover some things here, but um, you've said several key things. HR is part of the team almost, right? HR is
Yes.
collaborative. You bring ideas to them. I guess I have experienced both sides of that. So you do have, right, good experiences and bad experiences. Um, kind of in line. My next question is kind of in line with handling conflicts and consistency. So maybe if you, I'm going to ask this question, but I'm going to add a little caveat. Maybe what how do you see the importance of consistently handling complaints and things um, from an HR perspective? And then how do you? I'm going to add a caveat here. How do you handle it when an HR is not proactive? Maybe like just your thoughts of how to maybe bridge that.
Sure, sure. I have an HR friend, HR professional friend that she's told me many times. She says the HR department is not the principal's office. Don't send your
That's true.
employees with issues to me. You know, um,
That's fair.
the, the leaders and the managers need to learn how to work with,
Mm.
deal with employees. Um, the leaders need to be trained on how to confront. They need to be trained on how to deal with an employee that's having issues, have those hard conversations. Many times when a HR or when a leader or a manager has an issue with an employee, it's because their uh, expectations that the leader and manager is expecting are not being met. And so the leader, the manager is trying to bridge that gap and improve the employees, performance. And the issue that I see a lot when it comes to, I'm in the insurance business. I'm a risk manager. We insure a lot of nonprofits, churches, faith-based organizations. And the claims that we have seen, Jonathan, many times have to do with an employee that thinks that they were being treated differently than somebody else. And so, one of the main things that I hammer to these employers, to these HR people, to the leaders and managers is you got to be consistent on how you treat your employees. If you've got something in the employee handbook, you've got to follow the employee handbook. The employee handbook is not a document that just sits on the shelf and gathers dust, but it's a living, breathing document. And that employee handbook basically talks about the culture of the organization, how we're going to deal with employees. You've got to be consistent, with how you're treating your employees.
No, that makes sense. And I think, yeah, it's a collaborative effort there. We're going to get into some challenges, mistakes, so to speak, that you can make with HR and leadership. Again, what I'm hearing from the beginning here, Kevin, is it's a collaborative effort. It's not a handoff, right? It's not the principal's office where someone's in trouble. So now I'll let you deal with it. It really is a collaborative effort. And I've had good HR managers and I've had some not so good. And right now I have one of my best HR managers. And I would say one of the aspects that she brings is collaboration and proactivity. It's knowing her place, but also knowing when to ask questions. And are we treating this differently? Right? It's that, are we following the handbook? And it's not an interrogation, but it's kind of bringing it back to the basics, so to speak, of are we following the guidelines, so that then I can answer the lawyer's questions of they're going to ask the same question. Jonathan, did you follow the handbook? Or did you follow the guidelines? So, yeah.
And HR, that's a good point. HR's role is to support both the organization and the employees.
Mm.
The HR is there to serve the needs and goals of make sure the needs and goals of the organization are met, but they are also there to uphold the rights, and needs
Yeah.
of each individual employee.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, that's true because I'm just thinking the challenges I'm sure you've seen on a risk side. I'm guessing. Tell me, Kevin. I can be wrong. I'm just making this up on the spot here, but would think some of the risk here is when an HR person oversteps one of those two sides. They really are on a tight line there. They are support because the first thing is to what does the handbook say or what does the guidelines say or whatever, and not personally interpreting it the way they want to interpret it, but how does the company live it out and should live it out? And then if it isn't being lived out and the employee comes to them, it's not really taking sides and trying to defend either side. It's more of understanding, well, what has happened and how do we move forward? Where a lot of times I've seen managers or HR people try to interpret things their own way, or because they've made a mistake and not followed it, they've gotten in trouble and tried to just push it to the side. That's kind of where you've seen the risk come in.
Yeah. Yeah. They're trying to go it alone, and there's no need to go it alone. If you're going to have complicated issues.
Yeah.
There's people, there's resources available too to help these HR people.
Yeah, that's true. Don't go alone. It's true. Well,
That's right.
let's jump into a couple of common maybe mistakes that leaders have made with HR.
Yes.
I've never made any of these. I was reading through this, and I think I've probably made all of them, but that's okay. The first one that we're going to kind of highlight is treating HR like a fire extinguisher. Only engaging, you touched on this, only engaging HR when something's on fire. A lot of times, I mean, I would think this might be a majority of time happens a lot, especially for newer, but even seasoned managers. Um, so what are the consequences? Like, instead of being proactive, maybe you can go through both sides. What's the advantage of being proactive and the consequences of reactiveness in this?
Well, talking proactive and reactive, obviously, I would say it's very, very important for an organization to proactively invest resources into having local, legal, and HR help. There's a lot of resources out there, because if they do that, then they won't have to reactively spend important and necessary dollars to try to treat some situation. And from what we've seen over the years, if the organization, well, every organization is going to have HR issues come up. Even the ones that are doing everything right,
Correct.
you're not going to eliminate the risk, but you're going to lower the risk. And I can say at the same time, as you're lowering the risk, the chance if you have an issue come up, and let's say there's a lawsuit or so where a disgruntled former employee is coming back after the organization, if you have proactively spent money on doing everything as best as you can the right way, you're going to be in a lot better position, where the insurance company and the attorneys are going to be able to defend you. And it's going to be a lot easier than if you said, well, we never thought it would happen to us, and they didn't do anything about it. Then they're going to have to spend money and probably will lose in court and have to pay money. And then they'll have to go back and retroactively fix everything in their HR department and their employee manuals and spend money. So proactive versus reactive, very important. And as you know, reactive HR is bad HR. As we've talked about already, you don't want to be reactive. You don't want to go it alone. So you want to make sure you do what you need to do to better protect the organization.
No, thank you. And I think what I heard you say, if I heard this correctly, and I think it's true, is the more proactive you are, the chances of good outcome, and the more reactive you are, the more expensive it could be if it goes
Yes.
sideways, even if you made a mistake, because we are going to all make mistakes. But
Yes.
if you are proactive and doing the best you can, that's what I heard you say. We're going to make mistakes, but doing the best you can, identifying challenges and moving forward is key. Yeah. Not
Yes.
just ignoring it, not just ignoring it. So, um, well, a buzzword today, which has been a buzzword probably for the past 10, 15 years, is culture. Um, it's not really a buzzword. Maybe it is. I hear it a lot, but it's defined many different ways. I actually did a video the other day on culture, but culture is very important. And I think a lot of missed opportunities are had with HR and culture, because HR really does lives out some of the culture. So how do you see HR, and you can answer it any way you want regarding culture and HR, and risk even, but how do you see HR speaking into culture, like whether it's from hiring well or firing well? I mean, moving people on, onboarding effectively. I mean, that really is the first impression, if not the second impression after the interview. Maybe it's the first time because they contact them for the interview. So, how do you see HR shaping culture at an organization?
Well, HR, definitely wants to hire the people that are good culture fits within an
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, with a lot of organizations, they're just filling slots. They're trying to get employees to fill
Mm,
slots so they can continue to
yeah.
effectively do what they need to do. But we all know, if you hire someone and they're not a culture fit, then it's going to cost you much more
Yes.
down the road because you'll have to
Yes.
terminate that employee and that do the whole onboarding and training process again. So it's very important. I've been involved in a lot of organizations over the years and have seen employees that are great culture fits, and I've seen employees that are not great culture fits. And it's tough. You don't always know. The
Yeah.
employee, the applicant can say all the right things, to say that they would be a great culture fit, but sometimes you don't know until you actually, put them out there into the
Yeah.
job and see how they perform. And then you find out they're not going to be a culture fit. But there are many things that an organization can do uh, in the onboarding process to ensure
Mm.
or raise the chances that the employee that they are going to hire is going to be a good culture fit. And I think a lot of that, is uh, using experienced people that know the organization well, understand the culture, and can see, someone. I think, this person is worth taking a chance on.
Mm.
They check all the boxes, but in addition to that, they seem to have the culture and they seem that they would be a good fit within our organization.
No, that makes sense. I think I read an article, it's been a few months ago, but I was talking about hiring and just the onboarding experience does determine like 80% whether a person's going to stay or not. Now you have to have a lot of other factors, but their onboarding, if it's like, here's your desk and read the manual and have a great day, that isn't quite going to encourage them to stay as much as understanding the values and the culture and what's happening. So, no, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Many times, and I run my own business also, and we've hired a number of employees over the years. Many times in that first face-to-face interview,
Mm,
you can tell whether this person is going to be a culture fit.
100%.
And
Yeah.
in this day and age of Zoom and, phone and so forth, I still think, and I tell my organizations this, I think you need to face-to-face meetings and interviews.
I agree with you, and I don't know what to do with that because we're still remote a lot, and most people are coming back in the office. But so I have a 100% fail rate with Zoom interviews. I'm just being transparent here. I hate to say it. I'm actually thinking back to other companies I've been to. During COVID, I hired somebody right after COVID. We went into Zoom, and then they were in person. But I think I have a 100% fail rate, not like immediate fail rate, but after several months, it's like, wait a minute, this would have been identified if you would have been in person across the table from me and just talking more. It's just so hard to know on a Zoom call. So I hear you. I don't know what to do with that completely. I think that's the ideal, right? I would say that's the gold standard is in person. And I'll even go a little further. What do you think? I think sometimes people, it is, it's always what you should be slow to hire, quick to fire, generally speaking. That isn't always true, but generally speaking. What is your thoughts? I'm going to throw just a little bit off here. In the interview process, how many interviews would you recommend to lower the risk and increase the reward for a cultural fit? Because most people only do one, maybe a phone interview and then one in person, and then they hire, and then they invest tens of thousands of dollars into this person. Any thoughts on that process, number of interviews and what that could look like?
When we do in-person interview, you're not only asking the questions and getting the answers that and they're answering the questions
Mm,
that you're asking, but you're also seeing their maybe their maturity level.
mm,
You're seeing how they present themselves and so forth. I used to be an elder in my church, and we would interview prospective candidates all the time, and we would bring both uh, a potential candidate and their spouse if they were married into the interview. And a lot of times you can tell a lot just by talking to the both of them, when you're hiring for a specific
yeah,
position. Now, I know there's rules and regulations and
sure.
cans and can't do's with some of that stuff, but you're trying to see where they're at on a maturity level.
Yeah, no, it's true. Well, let's move on a little bit here. Let's see. Just from a risk perspective. So you're in the risk management business.
Yes.
Thoughts on, the mistake of just a fire extinguisher being in that line here, being proactive to reduce exposure or protect the organization. What are things that managers can do to work with HR or with organizations like yours to be proactive to reduce exposure versus reactivity?
There's an insurance coverage, liability coverage called employment practices liability, which will protect the organization for those employment issues that might come
Mm,
up from time to time, protect them and defend them,
okay.
and there's a complaint or a lawsuit,
Yep.
coming from an employee or a former employee. So when we're going through the application process um, for employment practices liability, the questions we are asking are, how many employees do you have? How many employees have you terminated in the last 24 months? What percentage of your total staff has been let go? We ask questions about termination procedures. What do you do when there's a termination? Do you get your legal counsel involved before you do anything? We ask them about their handbook. We ask them when was their handbook last updated.
That's a
We'd
good
like to
question.
see that handbook be continually updated
Sure.
um, as things change and laws change and so forth. But we also ask, has that handbook been reviewed by somebody outside the organization? Specifically, your legal counsel again. We'd like to see your handbooks reviewed by an attorney, a local attorney that's familiar with the
Mm,
laws of the state in which you are operating. So we'll ask those type of questions. Also, we want to know, who has access to the files. Are they kept secure? All those things. Do you do employee evaluations? A lot of them say, well, we're supposed to, but it doesn't always happen, and so, we ask those types of questions. We also want to know, is the organization, when there is an issue with an employee, are they documenting it in the employee file? We've had claims in over the years where a former disgruntled employee has filed a lawsuit or filed a complaint with the EEOC saying they were wrongfully terminated. And we will talk to the employer, to the organization, and they say, why did you get rid of this employee, terminate this employee? They said because they weren't doing their job. It was for bad performance. And of course, the legal counsel and the insurance company say, let's see the employee file. And they'll open the file and there's nothing in there. And there's nothing worse than terminating somebody for cause and then their file has nothing in it. So
yeah.
we say documentation, documentation, documentation. And then we
Yeah.
also ask, is there a process for employees? If they have a complaint or issue against another employee or against a manager, do you have a procedure for them to register those complaints? So those are the types of things we
Yeah.
look at beforehand when we're looking to
Yeah.
ensure an organization for
Yeah.
employment practices.
No, that's huge. I appreciate you gave everybody some great tools there, some questions to ask. And I think the key is that's a lot for a person to do. And that's why we use you. So, I mean, full disclosure, we use you. Phoenix Seminary uses your company to ensure and risk manage because don't think of all those questions. And having an audit is very helpful and thinking through those things. And you really do. I heard you several times mention you want somebody local. You really do. Don't want to be using AI for this. They can give you questions, but it's not going to help. I'm not an anti-AI person. I'm actually a video is coming out in a couple of days on AI. I'm not against it, but you really do want to have someone you can call and check in with and go through that. So thank you for that. I guess a follow up would be, Kevin, that's all valid. How would you advise or coach people on volunteers in this same realm? Because that comes up a lot at faith-based organizations, nonprofits, or even at for-profits. You have volunteers that come in and help for events or different things. Um, Again, there's liability there. Somebody's under the umbrella, the tent of I'm there with X company or X fellowship or church So, any thoughts on volunteers and working through that with HR?
Yes, and I will preface it with comparing untrained
Mm,
volunteers with trained
okay.
volunteers.
Okay.
Untrained volunteers should not be in a position uh, or given autonomy over personnel and HR issues. You know, they might be well being, they want to help out the organization, they've got a great heart, but many claims that we've had over the years come from well meaning volunteer leaders who think they know more than they actually do. And, you know, HR 7 years ago is a lot different than HR in
Yes.
2025.
Yes.
HR is always changing, always
Mm.
evolving. And you don't want people that don't know what they're doing. Um, Even though they're not costing you anything, you know, they're not on your payroll, but they can
Not
cost you.
yet. Not
They can cost.
yet.
So we would say we don't want volunteers also establishing policies.
Mm.
A lot of times we see that, you know, when volunteers are involved with writing policies, they can be policies that are detrimental because, again, they don't know the legal landscape and what you can and can't do. And sometimes even volunteers with nonprofits or, let's say, churches or faith based organizations say, well, we're a church. We can do what we want. You know, we don't come under the law, which is also not correct. You know, churches still have to follow mostly all of the employment laws, with the exception of being, they can discriminate on the basis of religion. So with volunteers, it's a lot of times, you know, when you're in HR, you've got a lot of sensitive, protected information. You know, you've got employees' personal information, you've got medical information, you know, you've got their employee files. And so that all needs to be secure. And we've had issues with volunteers being loose with that protected information and having issues down the road. So I would say an untrained volunteer, don't use. If you have a trained volunteer, you know, somebody that knows HR, it's fine to let them be a part of the HR department, but they should always be under the authority of somebody else that knows what they're doing. You
Yeah.
don't want to give a volunteer total autonomy into HR.
No, that's good advice. Thank you. Well, we've kind of touched on this. We're going to move into another mistake possibly leaders make, which is not documenting and taking feedback seriously. So, not documenting or taking feedback seriously, skipping basically the boring documentation until it's too late. You've already touched on that a little bit. Unfortunately, I've opened some of those files and they're empty, which is difficult. So, just, a lot of it's easy for leaders to avoid hard conversations or failing to document performance issues, which then leads to legal risks, actually cultural risks, I think, and poor record keeping. All that is together. What I know this is just briefly, but just your thoughts on this problem and some best practices, or just how you would recommend baseline for new leaders, or leaders in general in this situation to take HR seriously and document well.
Well, I think part of the process of training a leader or a manager is having a whole HR module
Okay.
where they understand the position that they're in, um, what they're supposed to be doing. You know, they're supposed to be working with their employees, training them, you know, working with them to improve their performance, and that they need to know what they can and can't do. So I think a good manager needs to have a good training from the HR department. And, you know, and again, it's a communication between HR and these leaders and managers. HR is always available to say, if you have an issue or problem, come to us and we can help walk you through that issue. But they need to be trained in HR, what they can and what they can't do.
Yeah. I think a challenge I've seen is a lot of times leaders are onboarded a little bit, but not enough. It's great to have a module. But then I think the other part, I think you'll agree with this. You don't have to. Is that especially newer leaders are always a little bit not sure where they stand. Like, did I make a mistake or what's happening? I think it's always important that you, as you mentioned earlier, it's not going alone. Having the HR with you, But also having another manager that's gone before you, I think is important to be able to speak into the cultural situation. Like, oh yeah, we had that happen before. Jonathan, yes, he was late X amount of times. He was documented. We documented it. Here's what we did in that case. It is nice to just pull that up and to have another voice in it, so to speak, is helpful.
Exactly. You could see an issue with an employee and two managers can handle it totally different,
Yeah.
and it is good to get counsel and see how other people handle the same situation, or just being able to tap, the expertise of another manager
Yeah.
and how they've handled situations over the years.
Yeah. I do want to just turn this a little bit and on a, not that any of this has been negative, but on a positive note, I think, documentation can be, I started this question with not taking it seriously, but I really, part of it maybe out of fear or whatever. It's just boring. But I really do believe I'm a coach as well. And I think from a coaching perspective, as a leader, where I think all leaders are coach should be coaches, but as a leader, as a coach, um, documentation is a great coaching experience if it's done well, because a lot of people are just not self-aware that they're making mistakes. I mean, some people are obvious that, yes, I'm going to keep doing this because it's who I am. But I have found the majority of people, when you identify with them a challenge or something they've been doing that they maybe didn't know or weren't aware of the consequences, it can be a great moment with them and with HR to have a breakthrough almost, to document almost a restoration, um, applying a little bit of grace there. There is a consequence, but grace, I can see it as, I see it as, now sometimes you get it down the road, just doesn't apply. You're too far down the road. But I really see it as a positive partnership. What have you seen? Just your general thoughts on that.
What I've seen a lot of times when a leader is having an issue with an employee, they talk with the employee. They say, this is what we are expecting you to be doing in your job. We feel at this time that you're not meeting our expectations. What you're delivering to us is not up to what we expect. And then they just talk it through and say, these are the areas that I think you're falling short in, accountability. And they might put together a plan, a restoration plan or a plan to get the employee up to where they should be. And I've even seen it where when they put these plans together, they're signed by both the manager and the employee.
Mm.
And so the employee is saying, I understand exactly, what the issues are. And, I will be working on over the next few weeks or months, I'll be working on improving that and bringing it up to where I think it should be. So I think accountability is very important when it comes to employees and employee evaluations.
Yeah, I think it goes a long way. Also, if you have a problem down the road legally, if you can prove that you had a conversation, I had a conversation with Kevin. We talked about this challenge that we were facing. Kevin acknowledged that, yeah, maybe I'm not doing as well. And here's ways I'm going to improve and work on it. It just helps, right? It helps from all perspectives to show that there was a bit of give and take and timing versus we discussed it and that's it.
And a lot of times when you're dealing, what I see a lot in the nonprofits and with the faith-based ministries and so forth, you know, they, I hear them say, well, we treat everybody like we're family. We treat our employees like we're family. And that can be wonderful. But there's pitfalls also
Yeah,
when you deal with family, you've got accountability issues with family, don't you?
you do.
So
Yeah,
accountability and job performance are not contrary to being a part of the family, as
yeah,
some
yeah,
businesses like to call themselves. So,
yeah,
and, I always hear the term, well, I thought, you were a faith-based ministry. I thought, you were a Christian ministry. Where's the grace? And, a lot of times accountability is and can be a mechanism of grace because you're trying to improve them from where they're at to where they should be.
yeah,
So, you
yeah,
know, being a
yeah.
family is good, but there's still accountability involved with family.
I'm laughing on the family. I've heard that, and I've heard the grace. I've heard a lot. You and I have heard a lot, I'm sure. But I just think of family, and I'll be honest, most families unfortunately have a lot of dysfunction. There's issues there. Why are there issues? Because people don't talk, and they're
Yes.
not working it out, and that takes effort. And what we're trying to do with HR here is to actually work through it. I know people don't see that all the time, but we are trying to. We've invested in you. I've been invested in from HR perspective. So what is my role in this? And I think that's what we're trying to get there is part of leaders' responsibility is to keep that investment going and not just dismiss. So that's my take on that.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And you're right. Talking is so important. Talking it through, documenting, very important.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to another possible mistake HR makes, which is, or managers make with HR, which is bypassing HR on critical issues. I'm sure you've never seen this in risk management, but making decisions that affect people without HR's input, basically informing HR after the fact. I mean, scenarios like, we're going to change roles or we're reformatting the org chart and informing HR, or there's a layoff happening and HR is in the announcement with everybody else. Or promote. I mean, the list goes on. I could think of a lot of different things. I know this happened a lot during COVID. HR was informed that everybody's going remote. Good luck figuring that out. So, and then everybody's coming back. So please figure that out. So, yeah, just challenges you've seen and how to overcome that so that it's a strategic partner, not a speed bump, so to speak.
I've run across over the years uh, a misunderstanding of at will employment.
Mm, mm,
Leaders will say, well, I can hire and fire at will. And so a manager or a leader will fire an employee and then they'll go tell HR, I just terminated this employee. And then HR, starts asking questions, what's going on here? Why did you
right.
do that? You shouldn't have done that without consulting with us first. And the manager says, well, I thought we were at will. We can hire and fire at will. But there's so many things that a leader or a manager that can do that can erode that at will doctrine. And, I've had issues where a leader or manager has told an employee, well, you're doing a great job. You've got a job here for the rest of your life. And basically, what did they just do? They just made a verbal contract with that employee saying they're going to be employed here for the rest of their life. So it's true there is many states are at will states, but you got to remember you can't do it without consulting with HR because again, you can make mistakes that could be costly to the organization.
Yeah.
And a lot of times leaders don't understand uh, regarding you had mentioned role changes or promotions and things like that. We've had issues where we've had claims uh, from a disgruntled employee saying, I've been at this job for, so many years. I've been doing a great job. I've got great evaluations. And then they promoted this other person that hasn't been here as long and is not doing a great job as I am. So anytime you do, you're making decisions regarding changes of role, changes of jobs or promotions, you need to make sure everybody, including HR, is involved to make sure you're following the proper protocols.
Yeah. And again, you mentioned this earlier. A lot of it's mindset, which HR is a great sounding board, if nothing else, right? They're a sounding board, and they're a sounding board, but also like your group, if you have a group like yours, that group, many times I talk to HR. HR is like, actually, this is a new one or whatever. They might reach out to your organization or to our lawyers or others just to get advice because there's so many nuances and we just don't know. You mentioned it's changed from 5 years ago or 7 years ago. It's changed in the last year. It keeps
Yes.
changing.
Yeah,
And so being aware of that. And I think it's just lower the stress level that you don't have to solve this on the spot and get help and have someone safe to process with.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So if you talk briefly, just kind of the tensions between moving fast, um, because you do have to move fast and protect the organization legally and culturally, but also not moving too fast. Some of that tension, there's a tension there But do you think it comes down to more the how fast you move depends on the circumstance? Like we're suspending, terminating today, or versus we're investigating and possibly terminating in 2 weeks. What's some of that tension, and how can HR help with that?
We have been contacted over the years by a number of organizations that say this issue has come up with an employee and we need to terminate this employee now. Um, what can you do to help? And so we connect them with HR resources. We can connect them with the different insurance companies we might be working with, help them walk through that. And a lot of times and there are some instances where you do need to terminate somebody immediately, or maybe termination is not the answer for today. Maybe it's just you're going to put them on leave for a certain amount of time while the issue gets investigated and gets resolved.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of alternatives to moving fast and thinking you've got to terminate somebody or you've got to take some action right away. Once you sit back and talk to other people, talk to professionals, they might find alternative ways of handling a situation. So we would say, don't move fast without first consulting other professionals.
I agree. Yeah, 100%. That's good advice. I'm just going to ask you a couple questions, just general. Um, what do you think great leaders do differently with HR versus just a regular? What's the differentiator there?
I think I've seen both. I've seen both, and I've seen great leaders and I've seen bad leaders. I think bad leaders um, do not take the time to invest in their staff and their employees. They're they can be reactive. You know, if they, I've seen bad leaders, that can lose their temper.
Mm,
Over an employee doing something
yeah.
the wrong way, and obviously, when you have those types of leaders, the risk of claims or issues coming up with employees goes way up. Where I've seen great leaders, great leaders like to involve other people.
Mm,
They like to get advice and guidance and wisdom. They seek help. They don't go it alone. Great leaders are concerned uh, about their employees. They will talk to them. They'll see how things are going. They want to know, how are things going at home. They want to be involved and just stay on top of it, because a lot of times issues at work are happening because of issues and things going on outside of work. And great leaders, I think, can recognize those types of issues that go on and can help, work with employees and
yeah.
deal with it.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Another question would be, what's one thing HR wishes every new manager knew? Any thoughts on that? You could do two things, but what's one thing HR that you think HR wishes every new manager? I'll ask it two ways. Every new manager and or seasoned manager knew.
Well, I think HR would say, from the HR perspective, that they would tell every new manager that comes on board that, hey, HR is your friend, not your foe.
Mm,
We're part of the team. We're here to help. We're here to help, with issues that come up with employees that you've got. So don't be afraid to talk with us. We're not to be considered an enforcer that's just going to put the hammer down on you all the time. There are many ways to solve an issue, and we're here to help. So I think a lot of
yeah.
times the managers just don't understand what HR is there to do.
Yeah.
Many people think that HR is just there to hire people and fill slots. And as we all know, there's much more to an HR
Yeah. Yeah.
department than just filling
Yeah.
slots.
Yeah. No, that's a great way to wrap this up. Is it's HR. There might be a mindset in many people, leaders' minds, that that's just what it is: hire and fire. But there's so much more. And to take advantage of that, I'd recommend people consider what are the advantages and even to meet with HR, right? And say, hey, walk me through what do you feel your role is and what do you offer? How can we partner more? Again, that communication and collaboration can go a long way. I want to give you the last voice here in the interview, so to speak, before I close out. Kevin, thank you for being on. First of all, it's been great having you. Any final thoughts or comments you have in this realm of HR and risk management?
I would say that the insurance professionals, the risk management professionals, the HR consultants, and organizations are here to help. You know, too many times we get involved in a situation that has already happened. We did this, and now we're coming to look to you for help. Again, it's the reactive versus being proactive. So just to let the organizations, the nonprofits, the faith-based ministries know that there's people there that are available to help walk with you and help you formulate policy. You know, they don't have to start from scratch, go to the drawing board to figure things out. People have gone before and done it many, many times.
Yeah,
And the HR people, the risk management people are always available to help.
that's great. No, that's
We
great
would
advice,
rather
Kevin.
work
Yeah.
we would rather work with an organization in being proactive than always stepping in when something bad is happening.
Yes, but better for both sides. No, seriously, thank you, Kevin, for being on, being here today. I do have information for Kevin in the show notes, so I would recommend reaching out to Kevin and his company for their services. As I mentioned, I use them currently at Phoenix Seminary and other local companies I know use them a lot. They've been a great resource. I have to admit, usually it's a reactive. They're involved in the process. We do the audit, but many times it is, hey, we're in a situation. Will you partner with us and give us advice? And so I appreciate maybe not so much reactive, but being in the partnership with us to process and then giving us clear direction going forward. So I appreciate that. Again, that information will be in the show notes. If this episode added value to your day, hit like and subscribe, drop a comment. I would love to hear how this added value to your day and how you've partnered with HR at your organization to move it forward. Until next time, I'm Jonathan Hankin, your change agent coach. Keep questioning, keep growing, and keep leading change.